I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interviews with Karla Silvestre and Valerie Coll for Montgomery County Board of Education. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics. If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse, democratic, and sometimes divided societies. As part of the show, we have conversations with local, state, and sometimes federal candidates, rather than ask them how they stand on a multitude of issues. These conversations try to get to the character of the candidate. General elections are now a few weeks away on November 8th. And in this episode, we bring you two Montgomery County Board of Education candidates, Karla Silvestre and Valerie Coll. The most important thing to remember about the school board elections is that all candidates are voted at large. That is, all voters in the county can vote for all school board candidates, irrespective of which district they come from. This episode is the only one we will do with Montgomery County Board of Education candidates in the general election season. Scott Joftus and Julie Yang appeared in episode 65 of the show. A quick search of the archives on your podcast platform will bring it up. Mike Erickson, Esther Wells, Grace Rivera-Owen, and incumbent board president Brenda Wolf either did not respond to interview requests or declined after consideration, sometimes following negotiation over the topic of conversation and time slots. The Silvestre and Coll interviews have timestamps in the show notes in case you want to go directly to one or the other. Music for this episode comes from Bethesda singer-songwriter Dara Blecher, who is a 9th grade student at Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School in Rockville.
How did you move on so fast? Did you ever care to ask if I've lost my mind? I do so many things to make you mine. Why did you have to go away? I'm right here crying on my bathroom floor, looking through the photographs when I was yours. Should've known that when you said you loved me.
Karla Silvestre, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil. It's great to be here with you today.
You wanted to talk about the Grow Your Own program in MCPS. Can you explain what the program is?
Yeah, Sunil, we know that we have a workforce shortage in this country. We knew that was the case before the pandemic. The pandemic has upended hiring and employment, and we have a more serious problem today than we did before. And so ever since I've been on the board, I have been advocating for a Grow Your Own program. I mentor Montgomery College students. Many of them are education majors, high school graduates from our high schools. And so I have seen their potential, but also their challenges in trying to get into the system after they graduate. And so a Grow Your Own program, as I envision it, and as we launched this year, is really to focus on our students who are multilingual, multicultural, know our Montgomery County communities, and really promote education. Now, of course, that's not an easy thing to do. When we do career fairs, we do a lot of things, but not education. We forget about education. And so to really promote education, we have some teacher academy programs in some of our schools, expand those. We have a lot of early childcare programs in our schools. Those are potential pre-K or elementary, primary school teachers. And MCPS employs every field from IT to finance to psychologists to you name it. It's the biggest employer in the county, I believe, with 25,000 plus employees. And so what we launched this year, fortunately, our former HR director, Helen Nixon, had done this program when she was the director of HR at Fairfax Public Schools. And so she modeled what she launched here based on that. And basically is you mirror a signing day. When athletes sign up to go play sports for a college and university, they have a big event, they sign, you get your shirt. And so the idea was to recruit students that were interested in education or mental health, because we are desperate for those as well. They sign up to be in our program. We connect them with some scholarship support. We employ them during the summers because we need help during the summers as well. And that's a way for us to stay connected with them. And when they graduate from their program, they have a job offer in MCPS. They still go through an interview process to vet, of course, but there is a job waiting for them when they graduate in MCPS. So I think it was 15 students signed up this year. It was a very, very soft launch. But we have, in 2 budgets ago, we built in some support in the HR budget, in the HR office, so that this is not just if you have time to do it kind of initiative, but really people designated to be working on this and building the program in the future.
Are there also grow your own programs that target employees rather than just students?
Yes, absolutely. That program's been around for several years. We're such a large institution. We are a people institution. Without people, we can't operate. And so we want to retain folks. And nobody wants to be in the same job for 40 years, or most people don't want to be in the same job for 40 years. So there's been programs in place to do 2 things. One called the Future of Work, and it's been more of a strategic planning process about how do we develop the skills of our current workforce to stay current, to stay relevant, to be ready to move on to other positions, and within the organization. And then the other one is more for targeting paraprofessionals, either who already have college degrees and need some kind of alternative certification to become teachers, or to continue their education, attain a bachelor's degree, and pass, become certified to teach in the state of Maryland. That's been going on for as long as I've been on the board. And it's a slow process because these are working adults with lives, right? And so they're not able to stop everything and take a full load. They take a class at a time here and there, but we are seeing results. And unfortunately, I don't have the stats on that.
The problem is urgent and real, but the solutions at hand, it seems, are sort of more long-term. Mm-hmm. How do you balance? How do you get around that problem?
Well, we have to do the hard work of the long-term work and make sure that those are in place and giving us the results that we have. What I've heard the superintendent talk about is, working with retired teachers and asking them to come back and teach. People in the community, she's given examples of people in the community that used to be teachers or had certifications, she feels she's done a call for help, and people have stepped up to come in and either be substitutes for different subject areas, or maybe they're not going to start a new career in teaching, but they're using their certification to help the school system out while we hopefully get over a hump in the hiring crisis.
Do you know how many teaching positions in MCPS remain unfilled?
I think it's in the 200s.
Do you know whether particular schools or communities are more affected than others communities?
I think the teacher shortage is pretty equally distributed, though we do know that our Title I schools have more novice teachers.
Have you thought about why there is persistently MCPS does not come up to the diversity numbers that you expect of it?
What you hear a lot about is partnerships with historically Black colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, but everybody's doing that. Everybody in the DMV is competing for a limited pool of talent. And that's why, I mean, Sunil, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a school psychologist, or I wanted to work in education. And people told me, Karla, try something non-traditional. Why don't you do STEM? And so I think there is pressure on first generation people of color to, really make their parents proud, right? In certain communities, a doctor or a lawyer is what's going to make your parents proud. And so I think that we have to, like I said, I think when we have career panels, we never include a teacher or a school psychologist.
There's a lot of lip service, but there's no visible effort to change it. And the truth of the matter is, almost all STEM programs have a huge retention problem that in their second and third years, students go, oh my God, I can't do this. And I want to get a social science or a humanities degree. That's the truth that is the truth. But we don't at all tell students the true meaning and the cost of a STEM education. But we tell them that STEM education is where you ought to be. And so it's not surprising at all that you're going to have a teacher shortage, because there is no standard of success measured by that.
Yeah, and you're not seeing any movement because this is all very much in the beginning stages. Like I said, 15 students as a launch. They did it. That's great. But this is just the very beginning.
Well, they also, some of these problems, as you know, and as you have said, have been persistent throughout your time on the board, not the last year, persistent beyond your time on the board. I mean, before even you were here, they've been persistent across decades. And we can't solve them, but we keep saying that we will look into the future. We look into the future doing the same or similar things. I don't know how you expect success.
One idea that I have, in addition, Sunil, is foreign trained teachers. So as you know, our county is a third foreign born. And in many parts of the world, our folks come with, some come with education, some come without education. But the county has developed and invested in programs to train foreign-born health professionals. The Welcome Back Center in Maryland. Mm-hmm. And they started with nurses, and then they expanded to other health professions. I think that we are at a point where we have to do a foreign-born education professional program to help people connect back with their profession, with their passion. They were teachers in their home country. They have degrees. The process, some people have no idea how to begin the process of getting your credentials evaluated, start to take the coursework that you need, master the English language, all while trying to survive in a new country. And so we have a good model in the Welcome Back Center. I would like to see our working with our county executive to develop, and the universities, of course, the higher education system. And there's roadblocks, but we can't continue to do the same things as you have mentioned.
How specifically would you get this done? Who needs to move next?
We need a budget.
How much?
I don't know. We need personnel at the Welcome Back Center, I believe, has a staff of about 10. So again, we have a model that we can use to replicate. They become specialists in healthcare and accreditations, but they weren't at the beginning So we need a staff. We can argue.
Who will house it? Where will you house it?
I could see it being a partnership between maybe USG and MCPS. The healthcare professional, I mean, it's benefiting our hospitals and our health industry, but it's paid for the county government.
Right. Have you talked to other board members about this, or have you talked to the superintendent about this?
I have begun to shop the idea. I began at Montgomery College because that's where I work and spend most of my time.
Yeah.
And the education department, because of the demand, is growing and expanding and getting additional funding from the state and the blueprint to increase their capacity. So I have talked to the previous HR director, but unfortunately she's not here anymore, and so I have to continue that work with the superintendent and the HR director.
Okay, so very typically, a board member, when they have an idea like this, they go to the concerned department and they try to convince the department to do this. How does it work?
I mean, you can do it two ways. You mentioned your colleagues, right? So if you can convince your colleagues and kind of come to an agreement that this is important, you can communicate as a group to the superintendent that this
How and when do you do that, though? I mean, how and when do you convince your colleagues that this is a good idea?
We designate times of the year for retreats, and the purpose of those retreats are I bring my ideas of the things that I think, Karla, we should prioritize as a board, and my colleagues do the same, and we come to a consensus around what the priorities are going to be for the board. That doesn't mean that I don't have my special projects that I'm working on, but those are not the things that the superintendent is going to focus on necessarily. But she has to focus on the board priorities.
Oh, that's interesting. How many retreats do you do?
The priority setting retreat is in January. That's the first one. And then we do at least one, possibly two, throughout the year.
And you also mentioned that there were projects that you had that you pursued separately, but the superintendent was not going to support. Those kinds of projects, how do you pursue them?
I'm speaking for myself here.
Sure.
Let me give you an example. One of the projects that I am pursuing with the superintendent and her staff is I want every high school graduate to have a post-secondary plan, a post-graduation plan. So right now, Sunil, a third of our MCPS graduates do not get any post-secondary training or education. A third of our graduates every single year are not going to college, are not going to trade school. I think we're digging into this. I think they're going to work minimum wage jobs in our county. And we have a huge service sector. We know that, right? And so I think we can do better than that. And so that was not a priority for the board this year. I wasn't able to convince my colleagues that was something that we should focus on. But I have communicated with the superintendent. She agrees that we can do better. And I have been working with the administration to kind of prep this issue so that we have more information, we have more understanding. And then I'm hopeful next year, come January, we have the basis and the background so that we can make this a priority for the board.
Do you have a survey that tells you why they don't go to post-secondary training?
No, that's something that we're working on this year.
It would be better, obviously, that students go to post-secondary training. It improves their life's chances. There is no doubt about that. And we can hypothesize about why they are not doing it, right? Probably money, supporting the family. But it's one thing to hypothesize and another thing to actually know. So are you going to do a survey?
Dr. Addison is doing focus groups. I don't remember a survey, but I do remember she talked specifically about focus groups.
The one thing I know is that Naviance is a system that tracks MCPS students, starting in middle school, going through high school. Why does that system not give you enough visibility on this?
Excellent question. I have a graduate of MCPS and a 10th grader, so I should be very well versed in Naviance as a parent. I am not, and so I'm doing a deep dive with staff. I think in November to really understand Naviance. But my understanding is that Dr. Smith brought this to the school system. He said this is a priority, and utilization shot up. And then through different change in administration, the pandemic, utilization is down. And so there isn't a consistent use of Naviance.
It's not very useful, to be honest with you.
You've been in there?
Yeah. It's clearly not useful for students that are not going to college.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it may be useful for some people, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so, it is a system that we have. You can work with the developers to modify it to make it more useful if you think that what's currently there is not useful. There needs to be an expectation that it's going to be utilized. It needs to expand the needs of our students. If you want to go into the workforce, there needs to be a workforce component to it. If you want to go into the trade schools, there needs to be a trade school component to it. So, but like you said, it starts in middle school, and that's when thinking about post-high school plans needs to happen. And so I'm going to be looking at Naviance carefully, see if it can be modified to become useful, and then if not, then pursue other options.
Okay. So this is another of your projects that is separate from the board.
Yeah, high school graduation is not enough, right? It can't be the only endpoint. We have to think of,
or conversely, it could be if the high school graduation was actually doing the things and preparing you for the workforce in a effective way. We have made it so that, if you have a minimum wage job, if you have a high school degree, you will end up with a minimum wage job. And so that's perhaps, that in itself is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I in my own work, I hired community engagement specialists who are outreach workers. And when I started my job, that required a bachelor's degree. And I said, we can't even hire our own graduates. So I lowered that to an associate's degree. But you're right. A lot of employers require a bachelor's degree, even when it's not really necessary for the job that they're doing.
Karla Silvestre, thank you for coming back on IHP Politics. Good luck on the campaign.
Thank you, Sunil. Always a pleasure talking to you.
You tried to hide your big surprise, and I fell for all your little stupid lies, wishing that I left you then and there.
That was incumbent at-large member of the Montgomery County Board of Education, Karla Silvestre, now running for re-election. You can find out more about her at karlasilvestre.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at Karla Silvestre _BOE.
How have I not seen all the signs? While I write songs on my guitar, I'm still here sobbing on my back.
Valerie Coll, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil. I'm glad to be on I Hate Politics. Although I'm not sure if I actually do.
You are running for the Montgomery County Board of Education. What do you think your particular election in D5 is about?
Whether it's in D5 or anywhere across the county voting for the Board of Ed, it really is about communication, and it's about management. One of the things that, as a 32-year teacher in the county, I've noticed and paid attention to how information gets shared from the system out to the public, down through the schools, to students, to teachers, to parents. And over a course of time, I've seen that ability to communicate effectively in real time really decrease in a way that engages people and lets people feel like they're partners and participants in what the system does. And I think that the other piece with management is that coming out of where we were over the past couple of years, particularly because of COVID, it really took the time to shine a light on issues that were already existing, longstanding, in the management of the system, and how the system has kind of evolved into existing for its own benefit and not necessarily being guided by its direct mission of providing every student with what they need in order to be successful, both as students and as lifelong learners.
My problem with MCPS communication is very basic. I don't understand what they're saying. I mean, literally, I have to do some background research and, look at, what they're talking about, figure out what happened. It's just really very, very inaccessible in just the language, like Orwellian in its approach.
The system's gonna system. The system exists sometimes to maintain its presence as in one view, and isn't necessarily interested in rethinking how it presents itself or how it engages with the wide spectrum of people that engage with MCPS, to the benefit of those people who want to be part of understanding what the system does, contributing to the success of the system, not just because they have students in the system, but because a great school system requires the support of everybody in the community to be on board with, making sure that our schools are staffed, are funded, and are using those funds in the most efficient, explicit way to benefit instruction and academic success.
We make the same criticism of a lot of other institutions in society, right? We say the same thing about the military. We say the same thing about Congress sometimes, certainly NIH, FDA, CDC. We do make this complaint that they are not responsive to the environment, rather that they are so robust in their internal structures that they become more about themselves.
Right.
So but this is a common complaint. I mean, it's not peculiar to MCPS. Do you think there are any sort of specific things about MCPS that make this complaint peculiar to the school district itself?
I think, one of the things that you look at, and again, I moved here in 1989, and when you look at the growth of the county since that time, and you see where it's expanded and where improvements have been made, and then you look and see where improvements have not been made, and you see different areas of the county that have benefited from development and other parts of the county that have been left behind, which means that schools in some areas seem to be doing much, much better and are more well off and well prepared than other schools in the county that have been sort of left to their own. I think that piece is very much an MCPS issue, in a way that the military analogy or the congressional analogy doesn't apply. And I think with MCPS, in the course of my time in the classroom as an MCPS parent, as well with my two kids, both going through MCPS schools and graduating from Springbrook, go Blue Devils, the issue really comes down to changes in leadership over time. We're now on with Dr. McKnight, our 7th superintendent. And every superintendent comes in a way that maybe every Secretary of Defense does not, or every speaker doesn't, try to change the way the House floor rules run. Every superintendent comes in having a vision. And that vision then over the course of time can impact communication, can impact curriculum, can impact assessment, can impact community organization. And then the next person comes in and the system says, oh, because now we're shifting. And a lot of times things that have been successful are baby in bathwater thrown out because this new person has this new vision for how something is going to come in. And I think that many constant transitions in core programming or core communication or core systems organization in any large organization that continues to grow, it's difficult to maintain.
What is an example of what you're talking about?
Well, I'll go to curriculum. So when I first started in the county, all curriculum was produced in-house. And that curriculum, back when people talk about MCPS's glory days, when, people were graduating and this was, our numbers were high, our test scores were great, and we were kind of the Lake Wobegon of the, DMV. That was, that's how we were operating. And we had our curriculum, we had our assessments, our grading policy, and things seemed to be working until another superintendent came in, and I'll sort of jump up from Dr. Pitt up to Dr. Wiest, where Dr. Wiest came in and, being very connected prior to his coming to MCPS, already invested in achieve.org by working with the governor's roundtable and the Better Business Roundtable on setting up Common Core standards. He brought that in, knowing that was coming up through George Bush and the idea of No Child Left Behind. So when that case started to come into play and our curriculum changed again, that changed our grading policy, all of the curriculum, particularly at elementary schools. It changed all of our assessment pieces to align with what Common Core was going to be. And then as that evolved, people started to fall behind in terms of being able to continue to provide instruction, because changes were coming so fast without being rolled out efficiently to give time to give feedback to how the system was changing. This is working, this isn't. A lot of teacher feedback provided through the Councils on Teaching and Learning, which I was elected to multiple times as a 3rd and 4th grade teacher. And I ended up being the chair of the elementary council. And I sat on that body for almost 20 years. Giving constant feedback and trying to work collaboratively with MCPS, only to have leadership, the teachers and the leadership we were working with would take that feedback, but then the board, the superintendent would recommend to the board, nope, this is what we're going to do. And the board would start to say, okay, with no real pushback or reaching out to see whether or not teachers had been, that teacher feedback had been honored.
Okay,
and so that's a real example of, since that time, and then changing from having Dr. Starr bringing in a lot more emphasis on social emotional learning at a time that was really important to make sure that we're not losing sight of the children in front of us. And when the board, as it was constructed at that time, fired Dr. Starr for reasons which have never actually been explained as to why he was no longer here. And then for 2 years, MCPS could not find somebody to take the job as superintendent, because as people came up to, apply for the job, they'd get close enough to the job and then they'd walk away. From what I could see as a teacher in the system, really, after talking to the board and looking at the way MCPS was constructed, people who wanted the job would be like, you know what, on second thought, this system isn't functioning and I'm not going to take on leadership of this system. And so those 2 years until they found Dr. Smith to be able to take over was really a time of sort of a void in leadership, and which led to, I think, kind of where we are now in terms of having a system that sort of functioned, but without that leadership developed some weaknesses in its processing that still need to be addressed.
Okay. The two things here that I would like to sort of follow up on. One is that, you talked initially about the system's gonna system, and that meaning by that the system was not responsive
Correct.
to environmental changes, in the demography of the county, in the needs of the students, in the needs of teachers and staff. I assume those are all embedded in that.
Correct.
Right. But you described the problem once you sort of broke it down. You described the problem very, very differently from the internal perspective, which is to say that it's the changeover in the superintendent and their visions and their and their sort of the roiling from that is what is causing this kind of problem. The system's gonna system because there's too much turnover at the top.
I don't think they're two separate paths.
Mm-hmm.
I think just like a train rolls on parallel tracks, those two things pull the system forward. That superintendency, and as well as the use of the way the system, exists for itself.
Let me ask you the second follow-up that I had was that as a board member, how are you going to supervise the superintendent and get them to do this? And I'm asking because the system is set up for the board to appoint the superintendent and then really give that person the leadership of the board. How do you change that approach? Because the board doesn't have staff. It's a part-time board. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the capacity to supervise a superintendent every day. I mean, they go to a retreat, they set the goals for the superintendent, and then basically step back.
I'm a guest at the wedding, but I'm not actually one of the people being married, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so how would you change that? Especially because in order to change that, you really have to make some deep-seated changes, and a majority of the board will have to agree that there has to be a more steady supervision of the superintendent on a day-to-day basis.
The mission of the board, and it's on the MCPS website, is to set policy and practice for the system. But one of its main jobs in doing that is in hiring a superintendent. However, the board is engaged in in its main work and in its subcommittee work in doing that actual supervision. And it may be a part-time job, but it is a more than full-time workload if you're actually going to do what the job entails. And if somebody is running for office to do that, then they're taking it on with that expectation, even though it may seem like it's, only going to be show up for meetings or go to X event or this event. You have to be able to be willing to put yourself into far more situations that are not at MCPS's, direction, but as your direction as a board, as somebody who's been elected to represent the community, to engage in that direct supervision.
How do you do that, though? I understand the problem and I understand what you're trying to do. But my question is, how do you do that right now?
I think you do that by restructuring the board. Once you've got a board where everybody on the board is in agreement, not that there's just a problem, like you said, the 20 year.
But that assumption will never hold because everybody on the board is never in agreement.
Although if you look at every board vote, how many unanimous board votes there are.
Well, that shows that, there is an effort to bring forward policy and resolutions that are pre-worked to be supportable by the board.
Pre-worked by the board doing the work or pre-worked by recommendation of MCPS?
What recommendation of MCPS? Because the board secretary is the superintendent.
But the board's responsibility is not to necessarily take all those recommendations and accept them as whole cloth. And that's where the board has to be willing to have far more conversations and do far much more work in actually pushing back on recommendations and on policies that are brought before them, and in monitoring exactly how the district is implementing them.
What is the venue for those conversations? And I ask again, because, the Open Meetings Act prevents you from meeting behind closed doors at non-meeting times. So any meeting of the board has to be announced and open, right? All the meetings, there is not that much conversation between board members at the board meetings. Most of the conversation is like a hub and spoke between a board member and a staff member. So that is the system as how it is set up. I mean, how are you going to change that?
I think you have to say that we have to have more open discussion during presentations, and there has to be much more time given instead of having presentations be like kind of drive-through examples of, well, MCPS has kind of already decided on this. We put it up for public comment, but we only posted it on the MCPS website, and it wasn't available in multiple languages. So now the board is just going to go ahead and vote on it. And because there hasn't really been feedback from the community, the board is going to say, well, that seems all fine. And based on what you've said, this is what we need. So we're going to vote for that. I think that conversation is not an authentic conversation for the board to continue to have in that form.
I don't disagree. I just want to know how you might change it.
Yeah. I think you do that by having the members of the board. You talked about that retreat piece. It really comes when you're talking about that, how the board sees itself functioning. There have to be conversations at the board among everybody on the board to agree that the process has to change. And that people are going to be, as board members, more accountable.
Are you hopeful that other members of the board will support this type of change?
I believe so. I believe when I look at the other candidates that are running and when I look at the people that are on the board, I think one of the things you have to do if you're looking to serve on the board is you're looking to communicate. You're looking to engage in gathering information, discuss that information, and make reasoned and rational decisions based on the information that is in front of you, whether that is historical information as well as current information, and then projected information. And the board has to be willing to operate in a way that it is not viewed and is not acting as a rubber stamp simply because a recommendation has been made. You can recommend lots of different things, but without making sure that we've increased our engagement and communication in the community, which the board has to direct MCPS to do, and then the board has to have much more of a public-facing discourse regarding things that are brought before it, then things will continue to be the same. The system will continue to system, and we will not be making the repairs in trust, and we will not be making repairs in instruction and programming the way we need to.
Valerie Coll, thank you for coming on I Hit Politics. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you, Sunil. I always appreciate talking to you.
I wouldn't lie, you feel so right.
That was former MCPS elementary school teacher Valerie Coll, who is challenging incumbent Board of Education President Brenda Wolf for her seat. You can find out more about her at Valerie Coll, 4BOE.com. She is not on Twitter, but on Facebook at Valerie Coll, 4BOE. That's all for this episode. Music for this episode comes from Bethesda singer-songwriter Dara Blecher, who is a 9th grade student at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School in Rockville. I hope you listen, like, and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Living life tonight, yet it hurts to see that you're happier without me. What can I say? It's probably just 'cause of me that you left so suddenly. Now I'm too scared to love again. You tried to hide your big surprise, and I fell for all your little stupid lies, wishing that I left you then. Move on, I'm just a little dumb girl. You broke my heart and left it there. Will I ever really love again? You made me pick up all the pieces one by one. You tried to hide your big surprise, and I fell for all your little stupid lies, wishing that you loved me then.